Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Kauffman, the founder of the Institute of Coaching with Margaret Moore and Susan David. And I am here with Alisa Cohn, who is just fabulous. I'm in the middle of her book, actually the second time reading, and it's wonderful. And it's called From Startup to Grown Up. And she also has a podcast where she interviews a number of major founders. So we're fun to hear what you have to say. Do you want to start out with just sharing some of your top thoughts?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Carol. I'm so excited to be here. And some of my top thoughts. I mean, I think, the work of my life really is encompassed in the title of From Startup to Grown Up. It's really about how do you think about who you need to grow into to be the founder of your dreams. But when I think about that, you sort of like being a founder, going from founder to leader requires you to grow personally. But the truth is that is the journey that all leaders have to go through as they grow into leaders. And I would say all of us are leaders in our own lives, and all of us have to do that personal growth to become, the leaders that we want to be for ourselves and for others.
Absolutely. And you know where that started, by the way? My son is reading Plato's Republic. And actually in Plato's Republic, he describes everything in terms of society, but then says, but actually it's you. Apply all these things to you.
Totally.
What are the kind of main challenges that founders are facing?
So many things. I mean, first of all, a founder is a certain kind of person. What that means is they're audacious enough and kind of crazy enough to think that they can build a company. We know that 90% or more of all startups fail. So why would they do that? They're by definition mavericks. So that's great because they're innovative and they are able to adapt and they're able to kind of cull together resources to get something going from nothing. That's amazing if you think about it. But the other side of that is that they can be stubborn. They can want to reinvent things their own way. Things should be a certain way. And also they are often disagreeable. The best founders are often linked to the personality trait of disagreeableness, which means that they can sometimes have an uncomfortable or difficult user interface, which means that they don't always get the most out of their people.
So as an executive coach, which you are, and you work with many of these founders, how do you navigate that journey so you get the best and they get the best out of themselves without dimming that particular style of greatness?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carol. And really that's for all of us, right? To understand how do we unlock ourselves and use our strengths, but not, and grow personally and grow our skills, but not take away the special sauce that makes us great. So the way I think about it is in a few aspects. Number one, I, like you, like many of us, use 360 feedback because what's very helpful is to get a snapshot of what people are doing because you are the expert on your intention, but everybody around you is the expert on your impact. And actually, it's very helpful to understand the disconnect at times between intention and impact. So that's number one. The second thing I do is, again, I know you do this, a lot of inquiry, right? It's not for me to say what kind of leader you should be. It is for me to ask you questions and create a container so that you can really think about the leader that you want to be. And then who do you need to be and how do you build the skills brick by brick to become that leader? And those are sort of a lot of the tools that we use I use in my coaching.
So what do you find? What is it that in your experience, what are the most common things that these founders do not know? What do they not know the most?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when you're a founder, the entry level position is leader. Think about that. Day one, you're the boss, and you don't necessarily know that people relate to you like the boss. Now that also makes sense when you're a founder and you're, let's say, a younger founder, and you hire all your friends. So that you hire 8 people and they hire all their friends, and now you got 20 people, and you're just you and them in a room, and you forget that, to quote our great friend Marshall Goldsmith, your suggestions are orders. And you sort of just think of yourself as this kid playing startup at times, but actually everybody around you is wondering, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What does that expression mean? And it's like you're up on a table with a megaphone screaming at you. And you have to realize that people relate to you that way, not just as the leader and the CEO, but in particular as the founder. And just being aware of that is very helpful. And there are times that you want to use that megaphone and times that you really don't want to use that megaphone. And the wisdom to know the difference, I think, is part of the journey of leadership development.
So I'd love for you to take us through a case example, a founder that you worked with, maybe who worked through those issues. Can you do that with us? Just share one of your great stories.
Sure. Well, there's a founder that I worked with a few years ago, and he was very unaware of the megaphone. So he was just being him, very mission driven, which very charismatic, very mission driven. And so what he would do is go off and think and dream and bring people along and influence people and get a whole bunch of people excited, including the external world, including his own team. And that was amazing and a beautiful skill as a founder. But then once you have all these ideas together and we're all kind of, rowing for this beautiful vision, he didn't know how to operationalize it. And he didn't have anybody standing next to him to help him operationalize it. So we call that in my business crazy making. So he was a crazy making founder. And he was just sort of generating ideas and people were exhausted trying to keep up with him, trying to even interpret what he was trying to say and trying to operationalize it. So one thing we did was, first of all, we helped tell him see how he was coming across with 360-degree feedback and other tools. So he began to really get that his beautiful skills weren't always working in those environments. Number two, at first he didn't like that people couldn't operationalize it. Like, what's wrong with them? They couldn't operationalize it. So we had to have a whole journey around, could you operationalize it? Is that your skill? Did you hire people who could operationalize it and really sort of see that he could bear the responsibility for maybe not fully having the right people? But third of all, most fundamentally, he realized he had to find a strong partner to help him translate his vision into action and operationalize it. So that was like a very, I would say rich, robust, at times frustrating journey. But ultimately we got to a place where he could go off and be the visionary and actually have these great ideas and use his beautiful strengths. But he had people around him who could then also help him prioritize and help the company prioritize and also, again, help them execute those great plans.
Yeah, so it's interesting when I was preparing for you, and one of the things you pointed me towards was your Tim Ferriss interview, among many others. But one thing I sort of fell over when I was doing that was him talking about creating a do not do list, not just a to-do list. What are your sort of top do not do tips for coaches as they're working with founders or leaders? What are your do not do tips for those leaders?
For coaches or for leaders?
First leaders, then coaches.
Yeah. I think for leaders, maybe do not this may sound very tactical. What happens in companies, especially early stage, is that you, the founder, are being bombarded with different kinds of requests, mostly to hire people. So this department is running close to, scale, or not scale, but running close to, full tilt. We need to hire somebody. My advice to you as a founder is do not do that. In fact, might be a good moment to take a look at that entire department and figure out, is there more juice we can squeeze out of it? Is there somebody there who can kind of reorganize operations? Do you have the right people there? Or do you just keep adding people? Because what happens is this very big rookie mistakes. Series A and Series B companies, they overhire, not really thinking about who they're hiring. And then ultimately they have to do a RIF, they have to do layoffs because they have too many people. It's like no fault of the people who are there. They were not really hired correctly. So like one do not do is do not just hire willy-nilly. I would say the second do not do is don't try to implement systems for large companies before you're ready. I think that a lot of founders, are eager to do OKRs and, have these kind of other kind of processes because they are sexy and also they like sort of speak to a larger company. But I think you really need to think about what is the right amount of process for the stage that you're at. By the way, one of the to-dos, so I'm going to now speak of this out of my mouth, is that, on the one hand, you, the founder, don't want to go corporate. You, the founder, don't want to have all this process around you. I promise you, at some point, you're going to need process. I'm sorry, but it's true. And so figuring out the right stage of process and the right stage of the company is really important.
Okay, so do not do one, the whole hire prematurely, etc.
Right.
Do not do two, don't implement before you're ready. And yes, we need process, but be smart. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
What's
Those are
do not to do.
I'm going to give a not to do for coaches. Do not assume that you have all the answers in an environment where you are not an expert. And what I mean by that is, I think we all do this as coaches. We come into situations and we've seen these things before. With startups, I think there's really a stage to go delicately. And I have learned a lot from my startup clients about how they think about management, how they think about people. There's a lot of different ways to be a great leader, a lot of different ways to be a great startup founder and a startup leader. And I think that we as coaches sometimes can have a little bit of an orthodox view of the way it should be. So my not to do is to assume you know everything. My to do is to really dig deep into what they are thinking when they're trying to execute certain strategies. I would also say my not to do is for coaches, don't panic. For example, it is normal for a founder to be like, we're not going to do hierarchy. We're not going to do managers. We're not going to, we're going to invent our own, management style or whatever. I'm like, fantastic. I look forward to learning from you about what you're going to invent. And then 6 months later, what do they have? Managers, career leveling, code of conduct, right? Because they are going to, learn their way into it. You as a coach can help short circuit that process, which is great. But you really have to also wait for them to catch up with the idea that reinventing management may not be their best strategy when they're trying to build a business.
Well, that's really helpful because, guys, I was getting some supervision from Alisa earlier and working with two wacky co-founders of a X billion-dollar company. And I was sort of, whining, I guess, about this quick decision like, okay, next week we're going to make everybody come back 5 days a week and we're going to do a riff of getting down to 30% out once we do that. And I was being a little judgmental about it. And then Alisa said...
Well, I said I don't have enough context to hear because sometimes that's the right answer, right? I will tell you, I just had Colin Breyer on my podcast From Startup to Grown Up. And Colin Breyer is a name you've never heard of, but have you heard of Jeff Bezos? Yes, you have. Colin Breyer was the chief of staff to Jeff Bezos as they were growing Amazon. He wrote a book called Working Backwards. It's a fantastic book. I love this book. And Colin told me the inside scoop of what happened when they got rid of PowerPoint and instituted their 6-page memos. And you know what happened? What happened is Jeff said, no more PowerPoint. And then everybody called Colin. Oh, he didn't mean me, right? He's like, no, he meant you. And that there was a lot of pushback for that decision. The decision was very challenging for everybody. Everybody wanted to go around it. It seemed temperamental. It seemed impulsive. The first 6-page narratives were 8-page narratives or whatever, were terrible. Everybody just wanted to take their slides and put them into a narrative. But over time, their 6-page memo turned out to be, most importantly, a robust thinking tool, which helped them gain speed and velocity. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good message for all of us to realize that sometimes it's time for the founder to put their foot down. And sometimes it's time for the founder to kind of read the room and see where everybody's going. We can talk about culture, but there's you want to sometimes discover what's going on. And sometimes you want to direct everybody. And again, the wisdom to know the difference is important.
So I may be very out of date with Amazon, but so a friend of mine was doing some major work there and described this process where you would go in and you would meet with Jeff and you would hand him your paper and he would read it. And 35 minutes of the meeting was him reading your material for the first time, then peppering you with questions and then letting you go. And what really struck me about that is creativity in the context of autocracy. Like, you must meet with me, you must do this. Okay, now.
Yeah. 100%. And so that's the whole thing. We think oh, you're supposed to delegate. Oh, you're supposed to trust them. Maybe that's a do not do. I hate to be this way, but I come into situations and I do 360 feedback for the founder, and the HR person will say to me, he should trust them. He should delegate and then trust them. And my question always is, Are they trustworthy? And I don't mean like, will they kill like your mother? They will probably not kill your mother, right? Can you trust them to come in on time? You can probably trust them to come in on time. But are they really trustworthy to do that work without direction? And the HR person, without fail, will be like, oh, that's a good point. And so what does that mean to trust, right? It's really, and you and I both know this, it's sort of like the delicate nature of when do you zoom in and when do you zoom out, but just blanket, go off and do the thing, trust me, I'll trust you, has led to like numerous disasters. But back to that Jeff Bezos 6-page memo thing. The other thing that Colin told me was that when Jeff thought something was important, he was an individual contributor on that team. And all of the other business lines were running without him because he was focused on being an individual contributor on these 5 or 6 teams of things that were really important to him. Like, I wouldn't have said that was the model of leadership, but apparently worked for Amazon last I checked.
Reminds me, I was doing a 360 with the CEO, and this just blazed into my brain when I was asking him how the heck was he managing the person I was working with. It was new science, totally wildly living in the future. And he said, I believe in micro observation, but I do not believe in micromanagement. So people would go off and he would observe, as Reagan used to say, trust but verify.
Yeah, I like that actually. Micro observation, that's a good word.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you can do that macro as well as micro.
Totally. Yes.
Well, as you know, I love your chapter on culture.
Thank you.
So if you could just share some wisdom about that, because guys, it's really, really good. It's got bunches of very good questions you can ask the founder to be provoking them on what is culture, how they think about it, how they, what the things they need to worry about. So why don't you share a little bit about that?
I'll riff a little bit on culture and then we can maybe talk about it together. So first of all, to say the obvious, there's 2 things that I sort of think of obvious. The first is when I talk to everybody and I sort of say, hey, what's culture like around here? They say, oh, we love each other. We go for drinks or whatever. And to me, that is beautiful. That is rapport. That is fantastic. That's not culture. The other thing people talk about is we have a ping pong table. We have snacks, whatever. That's also not culture. Those are perks. Those are nice things. I like ping pong too. I like pretzels too, especially the peanut butter pretzels. But that's not culture. And so what is culture? And really understanding what that is. It's really, what are the set of behaviors, the codes that we can assume for each other that we need to live by and that we want to live by that then help the business succeed. So for example, the sort of move fast and break things, which was the famous Facebook element of culture, which is no longer true because they're a large public company. They can't do that anymore. But in the early days, the point of that was speed. Beautiful. That's great. That helped them be successful. That helped them work. There's a biotech that I work with. Move fast and break things is not going to work for this biotech. In fact, it's more like measure twice and cut once. Okay. So if you're hiring people, you've got to figure out if that's a move fast and break things person or if that's a measure twice and cut once person. And through asking questions, you can sort of figure that out. But it's much more than do we like each other and do we have socials on Friday? So that's kind of one, I think, important thing. You really want to think about what kind of, as founders, when they start the company, it's very helpful to think about what would be the company of our dreams? What would we want to go to work with every day? And how what's the company that we really want to see every day? And you can design that as much as possible. Please do. Many people do not. And then what they have is the culture that sprang up around them. So one of my clients, he said he hired all these Stanford PhDs, very smart. He wanted to hire the smartest people he could find. He hired Stanford PhDs. That's fantastic. And then what happened? He hired a lot of individual contributors who are PhDs, right? They're going to get their thing done. And that's actually what they learn. So they are not working together. By the way, when you are building a company, you've got to work together. So what he said was, I have the fastest crew in the world, but everybody is rowing, but the boat is going around in circles because they're not working together. So it's like you've got to really think about what's going to work here. And then what do you actually have after you hired them? I think some of the questions that you're referring to are when you're, a certain stage, you can kind of assess what culture do we have. And one way to think about that is who are the most successful employees? Why? What qualities and behaviors do they exhibit? And why are those meaningful? So that's a great question to ask to sort of get at the heart of the matter of your culture. And the second question is, and you could do this either past tense, who did not work out here? Or if you want to be really brave, you could say, who's not working out here? Who's a bad employee? And what is the problem? And what behaviors are they exhibiting such that they're not working out? And what do we want to stay away from? And so that's how you get at the heart of the matter of your culture. And I think it's a really rewarding exercise. I talked on my podcast to Raul Vora, who's the founder of Superhuman, the fastest email system in the world. And we did a whole discussion on my podcast about culture and how significant it was for him to get at the culture and to understand what were some blocks in the business and then to unblock them.
Yeah, one of the things you say in your book, which I really like, is how you started out now, which is, basically if your company, if you don't have a strategy and a culture, there's just a whole lot of weeds that show up.
Yeah, totally.
And then you spend a lot of extra time pulling out all the weeds. And sometimes those weeds are people, sometimes those weeds are major projects, but helping them think that through. So I'm going to change the channel and now go to a second set of things you talked about, which is how can other leaders, what can they learn from founders that would help them? And then how our coaches can help that group.
Yeah. First of all, it's so helpful for all leaders to kind of inject themselves with a little bit of entrepreneurial magic. I just think that's very helpful. So what does that mean? Emphasis on speed, bias for action. In many companies, they're like, oh, we'll do it tomorrow. Let's meet again about it, right? No, let's not meet again about it. Let's do it. And recognizing that, let's make a decision and go. And decisiveness is one of the most important characteristics of leadership. And I think leaders could really benefit from the entrepreneurial spirit. The second thing I would say is sales skills. Entrepreneurs are the ultimate entrepreneurs are the ultimate salespeople because they've got to sell VCs, they've got to sell their first employees, they've got to sell customers, and I really think that leaders sometimes forget that aspect of their job, selling their ideas, storytelling, selling the vision, those kinds of things, and obviously selling customers and selling the people around them, selling the press. So I think really getting the sales skills and the storytelling skills are also very significant and important. And I think, there's something, I'll go back to David Heinemeier Hansson, the co-founder of 37 Signals. One thing he talked about was that as the founder, he feels like if he and Jason have the flexibility to make the decision as founders, they have no share, they actually have no outside funding there. It's just the two of them making the decisions, and other leaders will kind of get hung out to dry if they're not the founder. And I think some moral courage from leaders that entrepreneurs can kind of afford to take would also be a very great aspect to take into your life, into your leadership style.
Just FYI, people are saying, what's the name of her book again? And then Allison told her from startup to grown up. And also did I say that right? Startup to grown up.
Yeah. From startup to grown up. Yeah.
From startup. And one thing that you just mentioned now about storytelling, one of the things you bring out in the book that I thought was very interesting is how storytelling and the capacity to do that links to purpose. And really links to helping people stay very excited about what they are doing.
Yeah. I mean, purpose is everything for all of us, right? I mean, why would you do anything if you don't have purpose around it? And just think about for yourself, like if anybody, whatever you're doing, you're animated by purpose, you're animated by the bigger picture, or you're kind of drained because this is not meaningful. And you're just taking one pile of rocks and taking them from here and putting them here. And I think that's true. No matter what mundane business you're doing, you might be an actuary, you might be an auditor, all that. No offense to anybody in those professions, right? You might be selling toothpaste or whatever. Guess what? There is a purpose in what you're doing, and you have to go find it. And you as a leader have to help tell that purpose to people, explain, make the case, bridge the gap to that purpose. And that can really be, we're working together as a team. It could be you're feeding your family, you're doing honest work, and you're, building your career so that your family can have a better life. It certainly might be you're creating something, brand management and like selling toothpaste is like actually a very creative act. So there's a lot of different ways to find purpose, but purpose will animate everybody. And I think that's very much missing in kind of the workplace these days when we talk about burnout and we talk about disengagement. Well, we're the leaders, and how are they thinking about purpose? Really getting it clear for themselves and really helping their people translate what they're doing into the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I find that sometimes the organizations that are saving lives are bad at it. They wind up taking it for granted. My most extreme case was a client who did transplants. And the joke about her was she could do a heart transplant on a hummingbird while it was flying. And yet she was feeling purposeless, to which I said, how, everyone else says it's not life and death, but for you it is. She goes, yeah, but they're going to die anyway later. So
Wow.
literally, you're very actively grabbing the purpose and not being passive about it. Because I was shocked to hear her basically feeling no purpose about it. And then the work of helping her access her positive impact on people. And
it's so beautiful, Carol. That's so helpful. You made that impact on her, really. That's so meaningful.
Yeah. So we really have to be very active about it.
Yes. And intentional.
Yes. Yeah. So what else do you think that non-entrepreneur leaders can learn from founders?
I mean, like just having a mindset of feeling ownership. So I think that when you're a leader, let's say a middle manager, a more senior leader, sometimes even the C-suite and sometimes even the CEO in like a large company, you can feel like a cog in the wheel. And I think when you sort of grasp ownership, and so we've been talking about some of these things like active and intentional and proactive, you have to kind of realize like you are the one responsible for all these souls around you. You are the one that can, take a dramatic and make a dramatic decision and affect a lot of people and affect the business for positively or negatively, hopefully positively. And I think entrepreneurs really see that. But I think when you're in a large company, it's harder to see that. And so just taking it that like you can make a difference and you can have that impact, I think ownership is really important.
That just seems extremely core to us, just also with our own lives.
Sure.
All of these things also, like Plato's Republic thing, it all is a kind of fractal or a pattern for how we can be living.
Yeah. I mean, the first person you lead every day is the one who wakes up in your pajamas. Think about that. And think about the possibility that you have of leading that person who's waking up in your pajamas, right? That's first of all. And second of all, everyone is a founder in their own lives, everybody. And so that starts today. If that has not been true for the past 30 years, 50 years, 70 years, that's okay. That starts today. And so then if you approached life that way, what different things would you do?
Yeah, I love that energy. And also, a lot of the people listening, our fellows and friends, are owners of their own practices.
Yes.
And so all of this applies to each and every person, but even especially those of us who are coaches. What kind of cultures do we want to create? What kind of ownership do we want to create? How can we build our storytelling, our origin story? All of the things that you talk about in the book. How can we do that? So before I ask you for your last takeaway, people are excited you are here. So one way to learn more about Alisa is to go to her website. You see how her name is spelled? ALISACOHN.com. And
That's right.
if you go /scripts, there's a whole bunch of very helpful things that you can download. So alisacohn.com for a lot of great information. So why don't you bring us home, Alisa, with kind of your last words of wisdom for us?
Well, I just think the last words of wisdom from me to everybody always is this. We just spent this beautiful half an hour together. Thank you so much for having me, Carol. What is one thing that has been sparked for you in this discussion? What is one thing that you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that, or I want to do that? And then take that and go do it. Because for all of us, we got busy lives. And also it's like easy to be an autopilot. So what's one thing you want to take off of all autopilot for your own life, and then put something in it with intention, with purpose, maybe with some joie, some energy, and do that and see how it can animate and I think exponentially improve your life over time.
Well, that was beautiful, Alisa. Thank you. And I'll be doing that myself as well.
Beautiful.
I was really, it's terrible to say, but I was actually surprised at how much I love your book. Now, I don't know why I was surprised, but I really loved it and have now read it twice. So everybody, another spark is to really look at the book. It's got a lot of wisdom in it. So
Thank you so
time
much. I
to
appreciate it.
go. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.